Welcome to Module 3 of Developing Vocabulary, a Whole School Approach. In this module, we're going to have an opportunity to hear from some of the teachers who've developed vocabulary work within their schools and to get a real sense of what that might look like in practice. So the examples of whole school approaches that we're going to be looking at in this module show how teachers and schools have brought together the two key strands that we've been working on with them. The first strand being the strand of direct teaching of vocabulary. So in other words, we need to teach children new words. Which words are we going to teach and how are we going to structure that within our curriculum? Then the second strand that they've both worked on is creating a language-rich culture, which really wraps around all of the other work around vocabulary and actually becomes an integral part of your teaching and your curriculum more widely. Firstly, we're going to hear from Ian. Ian is a Key Stage 1 teacher and leader. He works in a school in an area with quite a high level of disadvantage. And you'll see when you listen to him speak that his understanding about the gaps within his children's literacy, but also the challenges with language within his community was the driving force behind the approach that they chose to adopt. We'll watch Ian, and then I'll give you a couple of moments at the end just to reflect, and if there's anything you want to jot down, feel free before we move on and look at our second example. So let's listen to Ian.
We focused on word consciousness, developing word consciousness in children and parents. We recognised that it was something that the children really needed. From the earliest age, speech and language was an issue, and that worked its way through to year 6, where vocabulary and speech in general wasn't what we'd want it to be. We didn't want to put on a surface veneer of vocabulary for a cohort year after year after year. So what we thought and decided we needed to do was develop that word consciousness amongst children and their parents. We've got a lot of siblings, we've got large families, so we thought if we could do that right, that would have a massive impact on children, not just in one cohort, but throughout, and possibly even generationally. We collected the words through the use of the contact books. What we did was we asked children to notice words that they didn't understand. When they've noticed a word, to have a conversation with an adult about it and then to record that in the contact book. What we then did was we were faced with a huge number of words. We were faced with tens of words every day, and there was a real choice to be made about, do we go for a quality investigation of some words, or do we go for the quantity and hopefully broaden the vocabulary? What we decided was that every single word needed to be acknowledged. So we got into a habit of early in the morning asking if there were new words. Children would put their hands up, they'd get their contact books out, and we went through the process of the child would say the word. We'd all say the word. We'd say the word slowly. We'd sound talk the word. We'd write the word on the board and spell it correctly. The child then would give us a definition of that word. The child then would use that word in context. We'd write that context and the sentence on the board. And then we'd spend some time just working out whether it was an adverb, an adjective, or a noun or a verb. We collected the words onto a sheet of paper that was visible in front of the classroom that was labelled Tier 2 words. That meta-language was important for use. The children were able to come and put their words onto that sheet so they knew they were there. They were able to come and look at them and see them again. I think by the end of the year we collected about 4 or 5 pages of A3 words.
Okay, so just take a few moments if you'd like to jot down some of your thoughts having watched Ian, and then in just a moment we'll move on and we'll watch Amy and hear her approach.
Our vocabulary project started about 4 years ago when we noticed that a lot of the children were really struggling with their vocabulary, being able to express themselves, and also in their reading being able to clarify different words, and often words that they might not use naturally. So we decided to put some research into place because we felt that the area that we live in, where it's quite a large area of high working class white background, disadvantaged area, that these children needed to have as much explicit teaching of vocabulary as possible. We started off by doing a lot of active research, looking at Isabel Beck, and also looking at the 4,000 most common words. And we found that going through that list, it was hard to choose which words to actually teach the children. So we decided that we would use the text that teach from the English teaching sequences as the source of the tier 2 words that we were going to use. We decided that we wanted the vocabulary project to be very much orally based for a number of reasons. Firstly, that the children would have more access to using the words in many different ways. We could change the context very quickly, and also children would be repeatedly hearing the word in lots of different ways. And it also meant that writing wasn't causing an additional barrier to any children. And the children that we were really trying to target were actually those children who had a lower ability in writing and reading. So it was important. And also it just made it a lot more fun for the children. How we actually went about teaching it was we decided that the best way to do it would be using more of a PowerPoint presentation. The children were taught the word, shown the word and given a definition of the word, and then using an example of an image in a context that the children would be familiar with. They would then use that word in full sentences, and that was really key to make sure that the children were using complete sentences. And also hearing it from the teachers as well. And we worked quite hard with actually asking the children to stop and start again so that they knew they were talking in full sentences. To support this, we also put sentence scaffolds onto the screen. And it meant that in a word would often be used in, say, 2 or 3 different contexts that the children would be very familiar with before moving on to a new word. So we'd get through about 2 words in a session, takes about 20 minutes, but the children are really active in all of that and they get very excited when it comes to learning new words. After about a week, we've probably got through about 4 to 5 words in a week. We felt that at first we wanted more, but these words we found the more that they used them, the more embedded it became. So if we had too many words, it meant that it was quite shallow learning. So 4 to 5 words in a week worked well. And the children were also using that in their writing. Teachers modelled it, both orally and in their writing. And it was a lot about teachers prompting children, having it up on the wall on a display, and making sure that they were using the words whenever it was necessary and appropriate. At the end of a week, we'd ask them to do a consolidation activity. That was often a writing activity where children would write it in sentences and play with the words. It was often incorporated with spelling and handwriting. But we actually found that because of the way that it was being successfully used in everyday teaching, in their practice writes, in their independent writes, even in their foundation writing, subject writing outside of English, that it was actually naturally being consolidated all the time. Then from there, really, it just kind of evolved that more and more, as children were coming through, they would remember a lot of the words that they were being taught previously and use that. So if we were reading, say, a class story or their own reading book, they would often get very excited when they discovered the word that we had been doing because they knew exactly what it meant. Some of the younger children have a little hand signal that they use to show that they recognise the word coming. It's developed really a lot over the last 4 years. As we've gone through, we've noticed that children work really well with clarifying. It improves their clarifying immensely. But whereas previously we were just putting in, we were telling the children what the word was and what the definition was. We now start our vocabulary sessions with the word in a sentence where perhaps it won't be in the same context as they will see it in the text. The children are then given strategies to practice clarifying, often seeing if they can find synonyms, antonyms, reading around the word, root words, can they use the root word and the spelling to help them understand the definition, and then we would then present them with the definition afterwards. And actually the knock-on effect of that in their guided reading and their overall comprehension means that they've become a lot more confident at clarifying unfamiliar words that they may not have come across before.
2 really lovely examples there, I think, of schools who have thoroughly embedded vocabulary approaches into their curriculum. We're going to finish this module in a moment, but just before we do, I just wanted to draw together a few of my reflections, listening to them both talking. Be interesting to see if they resonate with yours. I think one of the things that really strikes me is how well structured their teaching is. They both had a very clear structure to the teaching. It was systematic, it was planned, it wasn't ad hoc. Very different, but very clear structures to teaching. So that's a key point, I think. I think the other element of that is that what they were doing with their teaching was research-based and very much linked to one of the aspects that we look at in our CPD training, which is around what are the features of effective vocabulary teaching, you know, what actually makes a difference. And I think both teachers exemplify those really well. Both schools, I think, had built really good connections from the vocabulary work they did across all aspects of their English teaching and beyond into the wider curriculum, and in Ian's case, out of the school gates as well. And I think that, again, that's very powerful. Vocabulary is one of those things that locks learning together. So making sure that that's represented in your school is key. I've already mentioned the fact that both of their approaches are very much research-based. So they've learned about the research, they've drawn on what they think is going to work best for them, they've tried it out, they've refined it, researched it within their own school and developed approaches that really work. Both schools, I think, have also made strong use of high quality texts. And I think this is something that came out very clearly across a lot of our schools. And I'll say a bit more about that in the final module where we draw together some of the learning. Both schools have addressed priorities that they had identified, things they had noticed through their finding out about what it is that children are struggling with in terms of vocabulary, and their approaches really clearly linked to that. So it's a needs-based approach with that constant reflection to see if it's doing the job. And the last thing really I'd like to draw attention to, which leads us into the next module really, is the depth of understanding and knowledge that these two teachers and actually the other teachers and adults in the school had. That depth of knowledge and understanding has enabled them to put in place an approach that is really robust, really consistent and constantly developing. And that can't happen without good quality CPD. So the next module that we're going to look at is some of the features of effective CPD that you might be wanting to think about if you decide to tackle developing a systematic strategic approach to vocabulary in your school.